Central United Methodist Church as a pastor, and your lovely and astute and beautiful spouse is with you this morning. We want to thank you for being here. You have a history of being here. All I hear is good things about you. So wow. And that's good. That's good. Good things about your leadership, and about your faith, and about your preaching and teaching. You name it, we thank God for you and for your family. Welcome to Oxford UMC. All right, stay with me now, because this is a teaching message, and I really want you to get it, all right? It has to do with fear, and Michelle did a beautiful job talking about fear with our children. Let me see if I can present some good stuff to you this morning to help you understand what we're facing here. I want to begin by telling you something that over a generation ago, a British publisher asked several persons to write sermons to be published under the title, "If I Could Preach Only Once." Among those invited to write was the late Gilbert Chesterton, a noted English journalist and author. "If I had only one sermon to preach," wrote Chesterton, "it would be a sermon against fear." You got that? A sermon against fear. This was a wise choice then, and it would also be a wise choice now, 2022. For the world that then, as we always need to hear a message directed against the destructive fears that constantly keep us on the edge of movement, edge of nervousness and insanity. At the risk of sounding trite, let me say that fear is real and can overcome us. I've seen it happen in my own lifetime, and I'm sure you have too. But not all fears are destructive. Fear is an elemental emotion innate in all of life. The entire animal kingdom operates in a world of fear. Did you know that? For some creatures like the deer or the rabbit, fear is the sole weapon of defense. Fear is not their enemy, but their friend. It is said that a deer can be sound asleep and upon hearing the bark of a dog, start running at the speed of 40 miles an hour. A rabbit, on the other hand, startled by a sound in the thicket, is immediately stimulated with adrenaline in its bloodstream and is given power to outrun its enemies. Did you know that? Without fear as a preservative, many animals would disappear. So, nor is all fear harmful in human life. Legitimate fear are absolutely essential to good life. Some fears can actually save our lives. The late Bishop Walter Underwood shared that one evening a wife shook her husband in the middle of the night and said, "Zeb, wake up. I just heard somebody come in the house." And Zeb turned to his wife and said, "If you'll be real quiet and lie still, in a little while you'll hear him go out the door." As Walter Underwood observed, that's my kind of bravery. Some fears actually save our lives. The fear of speeding automobiles, criminals, drugs, etc. Other fears impel us to learn or provide us with emergency strength we don't know we even have. While still other fears drive us into each other's arms to be loved and comforted and bring a sense of security. But it is these other fears that I'm talking about, these destructive fears. Among these fears are the fear of rejection, losing control, being inadequate, failing, pain, dying, the unknown, being betrayed, being helpless, being hurt, or of a loved one being hurt. Elizabeth O'Connor, in her book, Cry Pain, Cry Hope, described a sermon she heard on fear. And she quoted some words from the preacher. Please listen. "When I reflect deeply on my life and what I really want, it is not to be afraid. When I'm afraid, I am miserable. I play it safe. I restrict myself. I hide the talent of one in the ground. I'm not only alive, the depths of me are not being expressed. And when I'm afraid, a tiny part of me holds captive most of me, which rebels against the tyranny of the misery of the minority. And when I'm afraid, I'm a house divided against itself. So more than anything else, I want to be delivered from fear. It is such paralyzing to be fearful. Let me just share a short story with you. You know that the week that the shootings took place, at the end of the week there was a prayer vigil. And at the prayer vigil, where your pastor and a few members of this church attended, I was in this large crowd of people. And then I heard someone say, "Help," and the crowd moved quickly. It was like a human stampede. As a result of that, I was pushed to the ground, and several people walked on my back because they were fearful of what they had heard. They were fearful that what happened that night would happen again. And as a result of that, anytime I hear a noise now, I also become fearful. An unusual noise. Wow. Fear. And our text today is dealing with fear. The Sea of Galilee is notorious for its storms. For these storms, when they hit, usually come out of the blue with no warning whatsoever. And one of these sudden storms came upon the disciples and Jesus as they were traveling across the sea. But Jesus, being exhausted from his teaching, he lay asleep in the boat while the disciples struggled to keep the boat from being tossed about by the winds and waves. The disciples were doing all they could, but it just wasn't enough, so they thought. There are times when we feel as they felt that storm is so big and our boats are so small that no matter what we do, our efforts seem inadequate. The fact that their fear was real and was about to overcome them is readily seen in the disciples' action to wake Jesus. "Master, do you care what happens to us?" Our fears come from our different worlds, all of them related and interconnected, by the way. Stay with me. Number one, our universal world. For these are the things we read about every day in our newspaper, and they tend to make most of us afraid. How can we not fear when we constantly read about prejudice and greed and bankruptcies and lawsuits and crime, and the list is endless? Our global world. And then there's our personal world. All of us have personal circumstances in our lives that keep us on a fearful edge. Will Joe and Mary be able to find a job? Will there be enough finances to go around? Will we be able to meet our obligations here? Will we have enough strength and courage to find a way in which we can become more relevant in relating and embracing children and youth in this community? Will there be enough finances, money to go around? Will the treatment do any good? Did we select the right school, or did we? Is our relationship strong enough? Can I really do this job that the pastor's asking me to do? You didn't laugh.
Oh, yes, I did.
And here's our inner world. It is here where our fears are nurtured and grown. It is at the point of our thoughts, our memories, and our imaginations that we have the most trouble. But don't you see that we will never disarm our outward fears as long as we are at the mercy of our inner fears. Inner fears. And then there is our deeper world. This is the place where only to God and us. Even our inner fears spring from this deeper realm. To be truly healed of fear, our healing must take place here within. I am talking about our need to receive love from the Creator who made us all. For God's love is the only love that we can love, that love is enough. And God's love is the only love that can genuinely alleviate and remove our fears. In The True Wilderness, H.A. Williams wrote this: "If you want to discover the difference which Jesus made to humankind, then go to the New Testament to find out the answer given is the casting out of fear in the lives of people." Fear in the New Testament is considered to be the root of all evil. It is fear which makes people selfish. It is fear which makes people hate. It is fear that makes people think that they're superior to others. It is fear which makes us blind to the truth. It is fear which makes people angry, mad. Fear casts out love, as love casts out fear. Master, do you not care if we die? Fear is real and can overcome us if we let it. And when we do let it, relationships are broken. Congregations and churches splinter. Communities turn in on themselves. Forgiveness is the last thing that people think about when they allow fear to take hold of their lives. As the storm was slashing against the boat, with the disciples fearing their lives, they did the only thing they could do. They called upon Jesus for help. I invite you this morning as a congregation, as an individuals, to continue calling out for Jesus for help. For centuries before, the psalmist had testified, "The Lord is my light and salvation, whom shall I fear?" You know the song, right? The Lord is my light and my salvation. The Lord is my light and my salvation. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall we fear? Call upon Jesus for help. And I'm suggesting that we do the same as we continue to move forward. The Lord is my light and salvation, whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life, of whom shall I be afraid? For the psalmist avows his reliance on God, and so are we. So should we. For our text says, "And Jesus awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, Peace, be still. And the wind ceased, and there was a great calm." Now we do our text an injustice if we merely interpret the story in a literal sense. If the story describes simply a physical miracle in which an actual storm was stilled, it is a wonderful story and we marvel at it, but nonetheless it is something which happened once and which cannot happen again. In that case, it is quite irrelevant to us. But if we read it in a symbolic sense, it is far more valuable and meaningful. For when the disciples actually trusted Jesus, trusted in his mercy, in his sense of justice, the storm becomes calm. You notice that? It becomes calm. When there's chaos, remove from our discussion. When there is argument, remove from our dreams and hopes. Great things can happen. But notice this, especially what Jesus said to the disciples. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you no faith?" For Jesus was asking his disciples why they didn't trust when they believed. The same question is asked of us. Why are we so fearful? Why are we so afraid? When will we learn to trust what we believe? After many years of study and reflection and prayer in my ministry and my life, I finally have some reasonable, coherent answers to what we as the faithful believe about God. Do you want to hear them?
Yes.
Here they are. We believe that God loves us with an enduring love. Say the word love.
Love.
Number 2, we believe that God believes in us and that belief becomes the basis of our believing in ourselves. Thus, no one can take our self-worth from us. Say the word believe.
Believe.
We believe that God will never give up on this congregation, upon this community, upon you as individuals. Even when we have betrayed our better selves and God doesn't give up on us. That's what Easter is all about. We believe God replaces our inadequacy with God's own adequacy. An old story describes a man who went to buy a Rolls Royce. It is the most famous car in the world, the salesman said. You won't find a better automobile. Some rules are still running after 50 years. And as the man was driving his new car home, he realized that he had forgotten to find out how much horsepower the car had. And so he went back and he asked the salesman, I could not find the answer anywhere in the materials you gave me. So he sent a wire to London asking what the horsepower was, and the telegram relay was one word: adequate. Adequacy of the indwelling Christ delivers us from the fear of our own inadequacy. We believe that God is a gracious God, ready and willing to forgive us. Thus, we don't have to live in the past. The past is gone. It's over. It served its purpose. We believe that we are only to fear God, for God is the only one who we really, really need to please. And therefore, we do not need to fear rejection from anyone else. And then we believe that God does not want us to lead fearful lives. For throughout Scripture, God's constant word to us is, fear not. Did you know that? More than 365 times we find these two words, fear not. That's fear not in every single day of the year. How appropriate. And finally, fear becomes peace in the aftermath of commitment. And the disciples, filled with awe, said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and sea obey him? The disciples suddenly recognized in the rebuke of Jesus an authority and power that they did not really know or understand. Who then is this? You see, in reality, there was no need to awaken Jesus during the storm, for there ought to be no panic when a person knows God and believes in God's mercy. No storm can wreck the program and plans of God. Did you hear that? No storm can wreck the plans of God. There was something great about Jesus hushing the storm, but there was something even greater. You may ask yourself, what was that, Julius? Simply watching him through the storm. That is what Jesus wanted the disciples to do, and that is what Jesus wants us to do, to watch him, to trust that he will be with us. Several years ago, I heard a lecture describing the psychological movement of worship, and I'll be done. It was suggested that we ought to move in our worship from adoration to confession, to thanksgiving to affirmation, and then to dedication. But after the lecture ended, a man came up to the speaker and remarked, that may be what is expected of me, but that's not the way it is. Some days I never get past the prayer of confession. That is our problem with our fears. Some days we never get past our fears to what could prove to be a liberating experience. I saw a sign some time ago that expressed what I'm trying to say to you this morning. It read, under new management. So how do we live a life of faithfulness to God? How do we disarm our fears? And here are some suggestions. Face the facts realistically. A minister suggests these facts concerning fear. I have put them in my own words. It is normal to be afraid. Life isn't necessarily fragile. Yes. Fair. No. Failures are not final sometimes. They are only God's surprises to a greater good. Losses can be expected, and consequently we must travel light. Critical decisions are always complicated by exhaustion. No wonder we feel exhausted. 90% of all gloom and doom talk can be discounted. Did you hear that? Nobody wants to hear negative stuff. Really, no one. People are looking for positivity. They're looking for hope. They're looking for authentic community. They're searching and wanting to be in a place where they feel the unfathomable love of God, and then live courageously. In the words of Paul Scherer, all great living begins in some quiet estimate of ourselves that will not let us play the coward's role. I may not always be pleased with my responses, but I will not run. Live courageously. May this church move courageously to be a stronger presence in this community. Love intentionally. If love casts out fear, as we are told, then the more we love, the less time we have to fear. So love deliberately, love passionately, love endlessly, love frequently, love intentionally. Pray unceasingly. That is the way we take care of our inner world. That is the way we take care of this church. That is the way we take care of each other. If our inner world is centered on the thought, will, and presence of God, there will not be much room for fear. Pray unceasingly. And the last one, trust unreservedly. We are far safer in the middle of a storm with God than anywhere else without God. And that is what we must learn if we are to disarm our fears and know peace. Trust unreservedly. There is a story about a friend named Leonardo da Vinci who came to see the unfinished picture of the Last Supper. His attention was attracted to the beauty of the two silver chalices on the table in front of Jesus. He exclaimed with excitement about the artistic skill portrayed in the chalices, completely ignoring the features and expressions of the central figure of the painting. And Leonardo's response was to take his brush and paint out the distracting chalices. "It is not the chalices I want you to see," he cried. "It's the face." Watching Jesus through the storms, our fears are disarmed. Our fears are disarmed. And we have nothing to be afraid of, because our Lord goes before us, creating a path and a way for us to see what's ahead. And when we can't see, Jesus will see for us.